Well, the mood was, at first we were all upset when he was going to show up. I had seen children in Donald Trump uniforms or costumes. I had seen people wearing, especially after DACA, I had seen people wearing brick suits, and I just chose to wear all black and cover my face.
And Sheila, you were making a statement. You wanted to be heard going down there wearing that shirt and dressed as you were to make a point. You got arrested. Just take us through quickly the police to move on.
Well, at first I wasn't, because I was outside the barricade. And then I passed the barricade. And I was with a group of people, and that's when they pulled me to the side and said I was not supposed to be here.
And is that because, did they tell you why? Was it because you were wearing that T-shirt, because you were praying? How did they identify as you as someone who didn't belong?
They didn't tell me.
Okay.
And they've still not publicly released why she wasn't welcome. She met the criteria to be there. She wanted to be there. It was in her community. She had an invitation to attend. She looked at the restrictions.
For several minutes, trying to convince her to leave on her own accord. The department then goes on to say there is some confusion about the area where Miss Buck was arrested. It was in a private event area, and the event organizer, in this case the Trump campaign, can have people removed at their discretion. That statement from the Tulsa, Oklahoma Police Department. Dan, you're her attorney. What do you make of this statement and the arrest? Was it a lawful arrest?
No, it wasn't a lawful.
She was at a private event, right?
Well, I think what's important about the situation is she had a ticket to the event, that the area in which she was arrested was a city street. It was not in a private area. There was no permitting that was taken out by the Trump campaign to make that street a private part of the event. So essentially what you have is you have a citizen of Tulsa in a T-shirt that says, "I can't breathe," and she's arrested for that on a city street 2 blocks from her home because the Trump campaign didn't like the message that sent.
You're convinced, Dan, that somebody spotted, in the Trump campaign spotted that T-shirt and thought this person does not belong at this rally?
Well, it was either that or she was kneeling and praying. And so, because there was nothing else about the situation, Sheila's a 16-year-old kindergarten teacher.
Yeah, you were a teacher for many years. You weren't causing a disturbance, were you, Sheila? Were you making trouble or just walking?
Oh no, I was
praying.
I was praying. I wasn't speaking to anyone.
Sheila spent many of her years in education working in North Tulsa. It's a deeply segregated community, and it has been since the race riots of 1921. They're referred to now as the race massacre of 1921. But Sheila had years of experience working with children in North Tulsa, seeing discrimination firsthand. And she felt like it was important that that community be represented at that rally. And if she wanted to stop, she had an invitation, nothing prevented her from stopping, walking around the event, and then moving on to do what she was going to do the rest of that day.
And Sheila, before we go, a lot of people may not realize Tulsa has a fascinating history in terms of racial justice and racial equality. In the 20s and before, there was a very prosperous, successful African-American community in Tulsa, extremely prosperous, from what I understand. And in 1921, Dan refers to this riot, or what some have called a massacre, where there was this huge crackdown on the black community in Tulsa. What is the legacy of that in Tulsa? I've actually never been to Tulsa, but what is the legacy of that in Tulsa? Is there still an undercurrent of tension there?
Well, yeah, absolutely an undercurrent of tension, but at the same time, there has been a lot of progress made, but there's still so much progress that needs to be made in that regard. And Sheila knows that she's seen that firsthand.
And Sheila, you saw that. You talk about what you saw as a teacher and how African-American kids were treated when you were teaching children. So you've seen this. You've seen this firsthand.
Yes, I would take. My school was 100% black, but there would be field trips. I would take the children, like whether it was to the zoo or a discovery lab where they are allowed to play with materials. I would see my children not allowed entrance into like the reptile exhibit.
Okay.
was a private school teacher and they wanted to let me through with the white children.
So you've been attuned to this your whole life, and something that you've cared a great deal about in your community, in your country. This would you say this worked out better than you thought in terms of all the publicity this event on Saturday and your protest and your arrest? I shouldn't say your protest, your appearance there and your arrest has garnered? Are you glad about what's happened in terms of the publicity that this has generated for what you stand for?
I didn't expect any of this. I certainly did not go out expecting to be arrested. I'm happy if my voice is being heard. I'm happy to have a voice for the cause. But no, for a whole lot of reasons, this is probably going to cause me some issues, some problems.
And lastly, Dan, is there legal action being considered, or is that not really on the table?
Absolutely no. We're going to bring claims against the Trump campaign, and then we're going to bring claims against the city of Tulsa for the arrest.
What would an unlawful arrest, or what would the claim be?
Yeah, it's a violation of her First Amendment rights to freedom of speech, which is a cornerstone principle.
Sure.
The idea that she's praying again to be arrested for that is a violation of her First Amendment rights. You've got situations where she's been invited as an invitee to this event. She had the right to be there. Nothing that the Trump campaign sent out said, hey, if you have a I Can't Breathe t-shirt or a Black Lives Matter t-shirt on, you can't attend. She was in no violation of any of the Trump campaign rules. And so for them to effectuate her arrest.
But you certainly knew that shirt might be provocative, didn't you, Sheila, to that rally, to those supporters?
I wanted a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, and I couldn't find one. So
I think also this idea that you couldn't support Trump and still not believe that an African American has a right to be free from police violence.
Right. Sure.
I think it's false. I think that's a false narrative.
Well,
I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but certainly she has the right to vote for who she wants. She has the right to go and listen to the president of the United States, who is serving in that capacity, and wear what she wants to wear to go listen to him talk.
Right, and express herself, which is what she did as a person of conscience. Well, Sheila Buck, thank you so much. And we're out of time, Sheila and Dan. Thank you very much for coming on. We'll continue the conversation for a moment online, but coming up next, we'll talk with Dr. Alok Patel about COVID-19 as California is at its highest number of hospitalizations so far. We're taking a break on air, but the conversation continues on our live streams, including Facebook Live right now. Stay here with us.
We're in commercial break.
Okay, and Sheila Buck, Dan Smolin, thank you again both. We'll stay in touch with you.
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Great job. We appreciate you coming on. Keep us posted, Sheila, as things progress, both of you.
We will.
Okay,
Right,
thank you.
take care. Okay. And now we're going to shift gears. A fascinating story that happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as you know, on Saturday. And it's interesting to talk to Sheila Buck, that 62-year-old retired teacher from Tulsa who went to protest, went to make her presence heard and protest for the Black Lives Movement by wearing an I Can't Breathe t-shirt. She was singled out by the Trump campaign at the rally and was taken away and arrested, handcuffed, and now they're considering some legal action because she and her attorney believe she was just expressing her right to free speech and attending the rally, and she did have, in fact, a ticket to attend that rally. We'll continue to follow that story, but let's turn our attention now to the latest on the coronavirus because there has been a lot going on in the last day or so and a long weekend with some interesting developments. Dr. Alok Patel is with us. Dr. Patel, you with me?
I'm with you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Great to be with you. We'll talk a little bit online here and then we'll go back on the air. But California's seeing a spike in cases, but a lot of thinking is that that's a result of increased testing as much as anything else. What is your take on that?
My take is I feel like it's almost dangerous for people at the national level to just be attributing the rise in cases just to testing, because we're also seeing a rise in hospitalizations as well. And so, you know, testing is obviously an important public health intervention to trace where cases are going, but we're actually seeing a rise in more people getting sick with this. And so hospitalizations are a better metric to look at, you know, the actual downstream effect of these outbreaks and not just looking at testing. So, you know, per the World Health Organization and doctors and public health officials, it's not just testing to account for the rise in cases. It's also people
10,
getting lazy and not following
Right.
restrictions.
I want to talk a lot about that. Let's pause for a moment, come back on television.
4, 3.
And welcome back. Dan Ashley with you. You may have seen the headlines, the new headlines. California is at a new high when it comes to COVID-19 hospitalizations. And joining me to talk about that and some positive COVID-19 news we want you to hear, our special correspondent who's with us always, Dr. Alok Patel. Dr. Patel, thank you so much for coming on as always.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, at what point would Governor Newsom consider scaling back reopening? We've sort of been accelerating it here in the last week or two. What would lead to us pulling the reins back a little bit?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if we started to pull back the reins if the current trajectory continued. We're seeing a rise in cases across the state, mostly in Southern California, but still in certain counties in the Bay Area. We're also seeing a rise in hospitalizations as well. Now, I think a lot of people are really comforted by the fact that cases seem to slow down here from about the end of April through mid-June, with that spike coming up in June 15th. And we're already hearing reports of certain businesses in particular counties scaling back. So I think once businesses start to reopen even further, especially specifically in San Francisco, once we get through phase 2B, if people aren't wearing masks, aren't following the physical distancing guidelines, if people continue to get lazy about these restrictions, we see more spikes. I would not be surprised if we scale back. And that's a reality everyone has to be prepared for. It's not going to be a popular decision. It makes me thankful I'm not a politician, but that is a reality that we all have to be prepared for if we aren't careful.
Yeah, and we're not even out of the first wave yet. That's what people have to keep in mind. Everybody talks about concern for the second wave. Well, we're still trying to keep control on the first wave. San Francisco, Dr. Patel, as you know, moved up its timeline for reopening starting Monday. Hair salons, barbers, museums, zoos, tattoo parlors, massage establishments, nail salons, and outdoor bars will be allowed to reopen with restrictions, of course. Now, that is assuming the state gives San Francisco approval for a variance here. As a San Francisco resident, you're out and about in the city and see what's going on. How do you feel about this decision? And then I want to make a comment, an observation that I saw and ask you about that. What do you think about this decision?
Well, I would be lying if I said it didn't make me a little bit nervous. And that's just because we fully understand what could go wrong. I do have faith in my fellow San Franciscans, and I think that people will do their best to try to adhere to measures. You know, the mayor's office and public health officials have been very clear about this, and they've been saying we're going to follow strict guidelines, and there is a possibility that if we have spikes, we'll have to scale back. But San Franciscans earned this. You know, we have a positive trend with, you know, following guidelines, and I think businesses will be able to safely reopen. But it does make me nervous because I have been out and about recently. I've seen people getting close together, for example, on the Embarcadero, not wearing masks in some cases, being close together. There's a reason why we had to instill the mask mandate at the end of last week. And so I'm a little nervous. I have faith, and I think people just need to be prepared for the fact that this could go wrong.
Yeah, there's a fatigue factor involved too, I think, and when the message comes that the curve has been flattened a little bit, emergency rooms are in better shape than they might have been had we not clamped down, and 3 months of sheltering in place and wearing masks, and the news that we're beginning to reopen, I think gives people a false sense of confidence that something has changed with the virus, and nothing has changed with the virus, correct?
Nothing at all has changed with the virus. And I think you're absolutely right, going back to your first point about quarantine fatigue. You know, we instilled these measures when the fear of the pandemic was brand new, and people were rightfully anxious about it. And now, after so long, you know, and I'm quoting a physician from Chicago about this, how long can you protect yourself against the boogeyman if the boogeyman is not knocking on your door? And so some people have this false sense of hope, and they're saying, you know what, we're good, we're out of the woods. We're absolutely not. And when we hear messages like that coming out of the White House or coming on a national level saying we've done great against the virus, I think people want to believe in optimism. It's why we're seeing protests right now, not only against masks, but we've seen these kind of protests against a lot of public health mandates, including vaccines. I think people need to look at masks and physical distancing in the same way we look at helmets and seatbelts and life jackets. It's a life-saving protective measure that we're going to have to get used to. And it's just something that's in our foreseeable future until we get an effective vaccine.
And I think one thing to remember, Dr. Patel, and you've talked about this a great deal, My mask protects you, your mask protects me, and if I approach it from that mindset, even for the person who's not worried about catching the virus themselves, if they're doing that as a gesture and a courtesy to protect their friends or their neighbors or strangers on the street, that's a different mindset to approach being vigilant about wearing a mask.
Dan, it's like you're reading my mind right now. And I think that mindset shift is exactly what people need to try to adopt right now to get out of the quarantine fatigue. You know, there's people out there who are young, healthy, they have their social bubbles or their quarantine, as they call it, and they say, we're good, we don't need to wear masks. But if you think about what we're fighting against, what we're protecting against, I think it'll give people a little bit more motivation. We heard about those models 2 weeks ago, projecting that we could see well over 200,000 deaths by October. We have a chance to actually dent that number and save a lot more lives if we just continue to wear masks. So it's less about what we're losing and more about what we could potentially gain if we just stay strong.
And we just had in the last 24 hours or so, something like 185,000 new cases diagnosed or identified in the United States, and I think 25,000 in California in the last 24 hours or so. So and I know some of that is testing, but it is also still being transmitted. Dr. Patel, we're going to continue online in just a moment as we go to this break. We're taking your questions on air and online. Stay here with us.
In commercial break.
Yeah, Dr. Patel, talk about that a little bit, because I know it's the kind of the issue between testing versus actual new cases and transmission. Maybe we're just identifying more people who have it, but clearly the virus is still spreading, or at least we're becoming more aware of its presence because of more testing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's multifactorial, as outlined by the World Health Organization, other people looking at all the data. Because, you know, this phase of increased testing is coinciding with businesses reopening and states kind of hastening, lifting their procedures. We're seeing different areas of the country, including in California, where a younger population is testing positive, and they tend to be the ones who are out there going to the outdoor bars, running, exercising, and not necessarily wearing masks as well. And all of this is sitting there with the reality that hospitalizations are still going up. People are still getting very sick from this. Mm-hmm. And if you look at these maps, for example, from Johns Hopkins, you know, in spring, we saw the cases on the coast, and now it's all moving inwards because people are lifting restrictions and people are traveling more, and the virus is spreading. So you can't attribute it just to testing. I will openly say, I just cannot stand that comment that came out from the White House about how if we slowed down testing, we would reduce the amount of cases. That's like saying if you stopped screening for cancer, you would have less cancer out there.
Yeah, I mean, sort of sticking your head in the sand.
Exists.
Right. I mean, just not knowing about it does not help us, right?
It actually hurts us.
Yeah, of course.
You know, it puts people at risk. It hurts contact tracing.
Very quickly, what do you make of the rally in Tulsa and the idea of bringing, we only have 15 seconds, bringing so many people together at an event on Saturday when you can't have rock concerts and other big events? 10 seconds.
I think it completely goes against what public health recommendations have been saying. It sends a very bad message as well.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Patel. We'll go back on the air. Hang on.
3, 2.
And welcome back. Dan Ashley with you on Getting Answers here on ABC 7. We are continuing the conversation with Dr. Alok Patel. Dr. Patel, from Facebook, one of our viewers there, how safe will riding Muni be, and how will they regulate the number of riders going forward as things begin to reopen and people really can get out and about to go to the hair salons and the restaurants and everything else?
So we heard a hint about this new mask policy at the end of last week, and I think public transportation, including Muni, is going to be one place where people will be required to wear masks. Now, I haven't heard specifics about how they're going to enforce it, but you know what? Ignoring the public enforcement, I think people themselves need to be very aware of the risks of taking mass transportation. A lot of people have to do it. They don't have another option. So you got to make sure you're wearing a mask. Think about the shared surfaces. You know, handrails you might be holding, sitting in a seat. Try to bring hand sanitizer with you. Make sure that you are fully aware of your surroundings. Physically distance if you can. We can't just be reliant on government measures. We all have to realize that there's a lot of variables we can take into account as well when it comes to mass transit and going to those businesses that people are so desperate to get back to.
Right. Well, we have to show responsibility and protect ourselves and protect our friends and neighbors and not let our guards down. I've seen, when I was coming in today in San Francisco, I see so many people on the streets, still very quiet on the streets compared to how it normally is, but wearing masks. But I heard a report this week from someone I know who went out to a restaurant over the weekend over in the East Bay, and they said no one was wearing a mask. Even the servers at this restaurant were not wearing a mask. Are you really concerned that people are going to get extremely cavalier about this?
I am. So I think the quarantine fatigue is showing a variation in the counties, even going a few streets over. I have seen exactly the same thing. I've seen people in San Francisco behave one way, and then going to Marin, Alameda, Napa, for example, you're seeing total variations in the behavior there. And remember, coronavirus can jump from county to county with a single car ride. And so we actually need to be a lot more consistent across the state, across the country, with with our protective measures. We can create outbreaks overnight if we're not careful.
Yeah, this is perhaps a very critical and dangerous time as we begin to open things up and people have a sense that we're getting back to normal. We're not quite back to normal yet. We still have to be very careful. Dr. Patel, we're going to take a quick break. Back here in just a moment. And we'll continue on Facebook. Dr. Patel, quick question. You know, I was watching who I think has done a great job. Governor Cuomo in New York gave his final daily address. I guess it was yesterday. And, you know, he talked about a real success story in New York and how they did flatten the curve and how they were the epicenter, and now they've been the epicenter of really pulling back and controlling the virus a little bit more. I thought it was sort of a triumphant talk and a real success story, but it also made me worry that it only fuels the idea that, hey, we're out of the woods, we don't have to worry anymore.
I see it from both sides as well. I think New York does have a lot to be proud of, especially because they went from being the epicenter to having a case positivity rate of around 1% to 2%, which is incredible. We're not even there. And, you know, I hope people look to New York and those different states look to New York and realize what they don't want to do. Now that Florida has the highest amount of cases in the country, they could very well turn into another New York if they aren't careful. And so, yes, there is a story of triumph, but I hope people understand that that's a regional story. That's New York, and that's the measures they took. No state, no place in the world wants to go through what New York went through in spring.
Yeah,
true. You know, a lot of healthcare systems can't even handle it. You know, people saw what New York was going through and they said, it's not happening in my state, it must not be a big deal. That's absolutely not the case, because we're seeing the cases start to spread inward in this country.
Right. Yeah, I know so many states that opened up, that were late to shut things down and early to open things back up, are seeing significant spikes, as you well know. Oh, from Facebook, Dr. Patel, any update on the vaccine? Any encouraging news? We got 30 seconds.
So people should check out the New York Times vaccine tracker. It's fascinating. There's about 130 to 140 vaccines in development. We have 2 in phase 3. Those are the ones that are the farthest along. And there's hope that there could be an emergency vaccine available by the end of this year. But for general public use, I think the projection is still somewhere next spring. Okay. So people should be ready to have this dystopian reality be our new normal for a while.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Patel. And thank you so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. My thanks to Dr. Alok Patel. We found out that Sheila Buck, who was arrested Saturday before the Trump rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, will be filing a lawsuit against the administration and the city of Tulsa. We'll be here every day at 3 o'clock getting answers for you. I'm Dan Ashley. We appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you on ABC 7 News today. And if you're watching on Facebook and our online platforms, I'm Dan Ashley. We appreciate your time here as well. Thank you for tuning in to Getting Answers. We love being in touch with you. Keep those great questions